Hey everybody, good morning. Welcome to the Qdabra weekly webinar. This week we are going to talk about qRules. I wanted to do a quick little qRules 101, sort of a getting started. My name's Hillary Stupa and I am a developer with Qdabra software. So without further ado, I guess we will just get started here. First off, the agenda, we're going to go through some qRules basics. How does qRules work? We're going to talk a little bit about error handling, when to use concat formulas and why, some tips for publishing as a browser form, and then we'll take a look at a sample form I've put together for you that has some popular commands. I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll here just to see where everybody is in terms of how long they've used qRules. So if everybody could just take a quick second to answer that. I'll give you guys just one more second. We're at about 75% now have answered. So we've got just a minor percentage who've downloaded the trial but haven't tried yet. A lot of people who have used it for less than 3 months, and a lot of people who have used it for a year or more. So we're kind of at either end of the spectrum here, which is great. The next thing I was going to ask, and I was going to run one more quick poll, is what you kind of consider your qRules familiarity. And because after all, you could have been using it for only 3 months, but you've been using it on everything like Tabasco sauce, or it could be that you've had it for years and you don't do a lot of form development, so you've only used it occasionally. So I've launched another poll for you to answer real quickly about your just kind of your personal assessment of your qRules knowledge. I'll keep that open for just another second or two. So yeah, we've definitely, it seems like this is a good group for a walkthrough on the basics, so that's great. And those of you who have got more knowledge, I think hopefully we're still going to have something here of interest for you. So good deal. Thanks for humoring me by answering that. So you know, this is kind of super basic information, but getting it installed. We ask that you run Setupexe as an admin. If you forget to do that the first time you use the injector, you're going to probably get an error. It's okay. Just go to your programs folder, find it, and run the injector as admin. Now, the reason why is up to this last version of qRules, the code library that we use in the injector to unpack your form files, because we all know that an XSN is actually a compendium of files packed up in a package. You can rename an XSN .cab and extract the files that way, or you can use export source files from the publish menu. So the library we've been using to unpack your form files requires access to the location where you've installed. So that's why you have to run the first time as admin, so that we can unpack this little DLL. The next version of qRules, we've changed the library we're using, so this won't be a requirement anymore, but just a heads up, you know, you probably already have it installed, but if you go to install it on a new machine, just remember, for now still, run setup as admin. When you inject your form, what we do behind the scenes is we take your form and we extract all the form files. We put in a code DLL. That code DLL is determined based on selections you make in the injector. So there's a number of them that we can inject, and we determine that based on selections from the injector. We add the Qdabra rules data source. We add, there's an XML file, and the data source gets added. And then we pack your template back up. So that's the basics of what happened in injection. We auto-detect what version of InfoPath your form is. I like to leave it as an option on the injector, because if you're like me, sometimes you start a form and you select the wrong version and you go to inject it and you're like, oh, well, at least I can select the right version now, and then I can save my form as the correct compatibility. Right now we default to a compatibility of browser and sandbox. I really encourage you, unless you need some of the commands in the rich client version, or unless you need some of the commands in the admin deploy version, I encourage you to just leave it at browser and sandbox. Your client form will work fine with that DLL because that's a subset of the functionality in Rich Client. You can admin deploy a template that's injected with browser sandbox if you're in a scenario where you need to admin deploy browser forms instead of publishing them directly to a library. If you look in the command overview, you'll see at the very back of it there's a matrix that outlines the client-only and admin-only commands. And the DLL for browser sandbox is it's simpler, it's slightly smaller, and I just recommend using it. That's what I generally use by default. The term set APIs are for a very specific scenario, and that is if you are using any of the qRules commands that relate to term sets. You probably aren't. Most of us aren't. I don't think I've ever used them except for training. So you probably don't need those. And you can always re-inject the form later if you haven't selected an option that you need. So it's not that big of a burden to re-inject it. I would just generally say leave it at browser sandbox and then re-inject if you need something else. Okay. The different nodes and groups in this Qdabra rules data source, there's a lot there. Like all of the injector options, there's quite a few of these you may never use. Okay, so the big ones are command, result, and error. The success node is helpful too. It does a true-false on success or failure. I tend to like the error node myself because that's the one that actually has values in it. If you are interested in taking a look at what's happened so far in your form in qRules commands, see that execution history group at the bottom? Drag that onto your form. That's a repeating, inside of that is a repeating group that will show you every command you've run, the result of those commands. It'll show success and it'll show error. And you can use that to help you find problems or issues in your form logic. I oftentimes have this in a debug view on a form that I just keep hidden from your standard user. So during a form session, I can go take a look at it. In extremely complex forms, I will occasionally add to the main data source and on form submit copy in that execution history using copy table. So I have a record of everything that happened in the form via qRules if I'm trying to debug a complex issue. That can come in useful. I don't recommend that. Usually just having it somewhere on the form and being able to reproduce the issue is enough, but it is an option. I'm not quite sure why I mentioned this in this slide, but I did mention it in the poll. If you are not familiar with the universal parameters of result des_ds and result xpath, that's this middle bullet, take a look at that. That's in the qRules user guide. We added that back in, I think, 4.2, and what that does is instead of just returning a result to the result node, it will return a result to the node specified by those parameters. So let's say you're using generate GUID to create a unique ID for your form, and you have a form field called GUID in your main data source. You could use result xpath equals and put in the xpath to that main data source node instead of having a second rule that sets that node to the returned result. So it's a great way, and if it's in a secondary data source, you can use result des_ds to specify that data source. So it's a great way to kind of simplify or streamline your rules. The way qRules works in general, just in case you aren't quite sure, is you're setting the command node to a string value. And what the code does is it has an onChanged event or a changed event for the command field. So anytime the command field changes, we take whatever text is in there, whatever that string value is, and we try to parse it and act on it. So the first little bit is the actual command, so we know what the command is and we go look for it. Does it exist? And then everything that starts with a /, it has some text and is followed by an equal sign is a parameter. And we go and we check those parameters against the command and we make sure that those are valid and that they're what's needed. And if there's a problem, we return that information to the error node. So as you're setting up your form and doing your dev work, get that error node on your form, drag the execution history on your form. Personally, I put the command node on my form so that I can look at my execution history and say, okay, that command syntax didn't work, and then I copy it out, I compare it to the overview, I tweak it a little, paste it back into the command node, tab out, and make sure I've succeeded. So it'll make your development a lot easier if you get everything onto your form. I also want you to note this little expires attribute in the Qdabra rules data source. If you have an expiring version of qRules, we'll have a value in there that tells you what the date is that the injected DLL expires. Okay. So for error handling, we've got the error node, and there's the success node too. It returns true and false. I tend to leverage the error node a little bit more than that because the error node has the actual error value. They aren't always super user-friendly, but sometimes it's better to return some error to the user rather than no error. So you can return that error information, or you can just leverage the success equals true or success equals false and return your own custom error to your user when something goes wrong. I want to highlight that if there's a condition on your command, you want the same condition on your success check. For example, let's say you're using GetInputParameter to sometimes return an input parameter that's passed in via a URL in your form. But the input parameter is not always present, and that's okay. It's expected. It would leave success equal to false and an error in the error node. If you then ran a command where field A has to equal 1, and right after that you just checked success, but you didn't have a condition about field A being equal to 1, the success node would still have the result from that initial rule that ran GetInputParameter. So you could have a false failure there, or you could be returning an error that you've already handled for. So I just want to make it really clear that if you've got a condition on your command and then you check the success node, you're going to want a condition on that as well. Error handling is also one reason why you may choose not to use the result XPath or result DES nodes as universal parameters to set a form's value. You may want to have that error handling so you can check and see if there was a result. Maybe you want that field left to whatever value it was before you made your rule attempt. Okay, so those are just all things to kind of keep in mind. I mentioned the execution history. Keep that around while you're developing. If you're having trouble with a form, throw it back on there so you can see what's happening. If your trial expires, simply re-inject your form. So it's easy peasy. All you've got to do is just re-inject your form. Okay? Let's see. What is next here? Okay, sorry. Let me hit over. Okay, so setting the command node. If your formula has no calculated input, you just enter text into the rule value box. So generate GUID, get errors. In this example, I'm doing an insert, and I don't have anything in there that's calculated. Nothing has to come from the form. Nothing's using functions. Easy peasy. And you can see, if just in case anybody here is an InfoPath novice too, you can see in the value box in that top screenshot, I'm helpfully pointing at the monitor while I talk, you can see in that value box in the top screenshot how that is not underlined. That's a visual cue to you that this is just hard-coded text that's been typed in. Okay, and if we look at the second screenshot, the one below that where I'm using a concat formula, you can see behind the insert formula, the formula editor, you can see how the value has an underline. So when you see that underline, it is a cue to you that this is a formula. The FX button was clicked and a formula was entered. And in this sample in the screenshot, I'm passing in a field value from my form. I've got my SharePoint library URL in the form that I'm going to use, and I'm passing in that value. So if you need to pass in a value, you use a formula. If you don't, you just type in the value. And again, like I said, the command field, it cares not how the string gets to it. It does not care how you populate it with text, just that it is populated with text and it tries to act on it. However, these concat statements are one of the ways where we sometimes get a command wrong because we've understood what our formula is going to evaluate to, or we have a surprise because a field isn't the value we think, or we get confused and we don't have punctuation correct. And that's again where the execution history can come in helpful, can be helpful, because you can take a look at it and you can see what the actual command that was passed in was. I was helping someone on the forum recently and we ran into that, and when we looked at the error node for the error that was returned for our command, we could see that we had some stuff wrong in our XPath filter. We'd missed a closing quote, we'd missed a closing bracket, but you know, we weren't seeing it in the formula editor. So those are just some things that can help you debug your issues. So next I want to talk about publishing as a browser form, and I am going to run another quick poll, and this one is just on whether you generally use filler or browser. You know, I find that my development work is probably about 35 or 40% filler, and the rest browser. It looks like you guys are using a lot of browser forms and almost no filler forms. You guys definitely should be injecting with Browser Sandbox then. Okay, we've got a couple shouting out for filler. Yeah, there's some stuff you can do in filler that you just can't do in browser, just in general in InfoPath, but I know browser forms are common and popular. I'm going to go ahead and just close that poll. Okay, so publishing as a browser form. To be extremely clear, qRules is code, and when we add code to our form, the rules change. Okay, so you've been publishing your giant 400 view massive form happily to a library for the past 6 months as you've been working on taking care of all of its functionality, and then you inject it with qRules and your form will no longer publish. This is not surprising to me. I mean, it might be if you haven't done this before, but the minute you add code to that form, it goes into the SharePoint sandbox if you're publishing directly to a library, and there's different rules there. Your form may time out when it's being checked as far as compatibility goes. You may not have the right permissions to publish a sandboxed form. You were fine when you were just publishing directly to the library before your form had code, but then once you added code, now all of a sudden you're not fine anymore. So the first thing I would suggest is that you take a new blank form, inject qRules in it, and try to publish it to a test library on the same site collection that you want to publish whatever your production form is. Just make sure that you're not going to have any problems publishing a form with code. If you cannot get it to sandbox enable, publish up to a library, you need to make sure that the sandbox service is enabled, and you must be a site collection admin. One of the things I'm going to include with the webinar materials today is a form with a single line of code in it. qRules forms, when you publish those, don't give you back as good of a message in terms of why it won't sandbox as a form with code will. So the form with code you can take and you can try to publish to the same library, and if the issue is that sandbox service is not enabled and your SharePoint admin told you something incorrect about that, or if you're not actually a site collection admin, you'll get back a better message. As far as admin deploying, you have to access central admin to upload it, or you need to have a SharePoint admin who's going to be able to do that for you. Sometimes when you're relying on someone else and you're in the development process for a form, that can be a little frustrating. If you've got access to publish it yourself, then admin deploying isn't such a big deal. You really do want to, as you're doing development work, you really do want to publish often. There's little things that I've seen block browser publish that don't block if you don't have code, or that don't block the form and filler. So do check frequently. And one final note with browser forms and qRules, and that is postback. I see in the forum and I see in our support alias people saying that, you know, oh, it worked fine in filler, and then when I got it published up to the browser, nothing happens when I click my button, or nothing happens when I fill out my field. And You can find out pretty easily if your issue is postback by hitting close on the buttons in the ribbon, and then when you get the pop-up saying, oh, some data's changed, do you want to save your changes, hit cancel, and that forces a postback, and then all of a sudden everything fires, right? But in general, just make sure before you deploy your form that you've gone through and checked anything that's running a qRules command, a button or a field, control like a drop down or whatever, and just make sure that postback is set to always on those. It needs to post back to the server to execute the code. Okay, so that's kind of that in terms of some basics on qRules. And I'm going to stop my slideshow now, or pause my slideshow. I'm not sure what I'm doing when it comes to the slideshow, quite frankly. And I want to show you a couple of little forms that I'm going to include with the webinar files. So do take the survey after the webinar and we'll get these files to you. This is a simple form with code on your machine. When you go to publish it, it will pop up a message box telling you that it cannot find its source files. When you see that message box, one of the choices you have is ignore, and you can just click that and it will publish with the current code DLL that's in it. This form has code in it that sets that text box right there to hello. Okay, it's just got a single loading rule, sets the text box to hello. But if you have doubts as to whether or not you're going to be able to publish a form with code directly to a library on a site collection, try publishing this. See if you get back a better error message. I send this sometimes to our clients to have them check things like, is Sandbox enabled? And in fact, it'll tell you whether it is or not. If this publishes successfully, you have a better chance that your qRules form will publish successfully. I'll go ahead and close that. So that's going to come with the webinar files. It's just like I said, a simple form with code. So here's my other sample form, and we're going to take a quick look at this. You'll be able to look at it in more in depth later. This does have a trial build of qRules. It expires on June 15th. So first off is GetInputParameter. That's a pretty, especially if you're using browser forms, that's a pretty handy it's a pretty handy command. It takes input parameters from the URL, so you can put an input parameter in the URL when you open the form, and it'll return the value here. You want to use the finished loading node here for rules that you want to have occur on load that execute qRules commands. The reason is because rules run before code. Okay, so if you think about that for a second, qRules is code, rules run before code. If I add my form load rules up here on form load, the code may not be fully loaded, okay, because rules run before code. So I may be trying to execute something that isn't ready yet. Okay? So in the code for qRules, we set finish loading to true when, big surprise, all the code has loaded, okay? So when finish loading is equal to true, I'm going to run this command, which is GetInputParameter. You can see it's a hard-coded value. The key I'm passing in is IP value, and you can see I've set a result XPath here that's going to populate my key from param, is the name of my field. And so I've got a single rule that will populate this field. Now, one issue people have with GetInputParameter, or can have, is you have to publish your form to test it. Or you may think you have to publish your form to test it. And that is frustrating, in my opinion, because it makes it a little hard to debug. So we can we can preview from the command prompt. And I'm going to show you how to do that so you don't have to publish your form to test an input parameter. And that is because what if you are using admin deployed forms, and then you've got to wait for your SharePoint admin to redeploy it. I've got notes here in my slides. I'm going to get this over so I can grab those. And then you've got to wait for your SharePoint admin to redeploy it just so you can test a change, and we don't want to have to do that. That's kind of I don't know, kind of a pain. So in command prompt here, first we want to navigate to where we have I've got resume slideshow, that's nice, to where we have InfoPath installed. So I'm going to paste, whoops, sorry. There we go. Okay, so now we've navigated to where InfoPath is. And what we run is InfoPath exe, and we pass in some stuff. Let's just paste this in here. Whoops. I'm going to go back to the command prompt so you can see that. But you can see we've got hi everyone here. That's the value of the parameter that I passed in. All right, let's take a look at what I used. InfoPath.exe, so I'm saying run InfoPath. I've got extra quote marks helpfully around this, but you don't need them. So you've got the path to your form, to your XSN, and then here's your input parameters. And I'm saying, you know, here's what I'm going to pass in is this particular value. Let's do this one more time, and we'll add a second parameter. I want to see if I can do this without making too much of a mess. Syntax, I think, is just an and. We'll call it new key equals test, because I'm pretty good at thinking up values. There we go. All right, so here is my IP value parameter. This is the one that I've got set up. And now I want to get my other one, which was new key. Okay, so I can just execute the command here. I'm going to do get input. Oh, look at that. Looks like when I was testing I used, oh no, I used new key, didn't I? Parameter key equals new key, right? And I tab out, and you can see right here what my result was and my success is. So this is the execution history here. This is my little debug view where I've got a command, and now I was able to get back my second input parameter. So if you are using GetInputParameter, yes, of course, if it's a browser form, you want to test it in the browser, but do leverage the command prompt for testing while you're doing your development work. It'll make things easier for you if you have a lot of rules or complex rules, or you've got some gnarly problem that you're having trouble debugging, okay? So in the notes for the slideshow, I've got some of the syntax, and you can use that. There's also the old InfoPath team blog that's still up online, and so if you search for InfoPath input parameters, you'll find some samples of command prompt usage. Okay, so that was the first thing I wanted to show you that we've gotten here. The next thing I had on my list was save to SharePoint. I've also got this set up in the browser so that you can take a look at it there. So what I've done here with my little save to SharePoint sample is I've got a spot for you to enter your URL, so you can just take this and try it. My little file control section here, I'm hiding it if the qRules link is not blank, so that all you'll end up seeing is the URL for the file. This right here is just an upload button that runs the Save to SharePoint command. This button down here runs the same Save to SharePoint command. In case you did not know this about Save to SharePoint, by default, if your file node is repeating or your attachment node is repeating, it's going to go through all of them. It's just going to act on anything that is not blank. After it populates the link and the file name, it sets the attachment field to blank for you. So it makes it pretty easy to get things uploaded. You can upload one at a time. You can upload all at once. We also have a delete from SharePoint command, which I've added here. And the qRules link field has the URL, and that's the parameter that you need. So you can use delete from SharePoint, and you can use your qRules link to go delete a file. And that way, if your user looks at their filled out form and they've got a link here to a file and they're like, oh, that's not the file I want anymore, they can click delete and they can upload a new one. And I'll go ahead and run through this in the browser with you. One thing to note on Save to SharePoint, with InfoPath 2013, I have seen that in preview, you have to set your form to full trust. You don't have to sign it or anything like that. Just set it to full trust when you're previewing. When you're ready to publish, you can set it to domain trust again, and it works just fine in filler in domain trust. It's just for preview for some reason. So just something to note. So if we go to my Save to SharePoint library, and I'm going to hit Add Document, this is the library where I want to save things. So I'm just going to copy this URL because I'm, as we all know, a little bit lazy. I probably should have loaded this once earlier today and woken up the server. I did not. So we'll let that load, and hopefully it will do so quickly. I don't have anything else here very interesting. I'm hiding this section if the link is blank. Oh, there we go. And let's go here to Save to SharePoint. And I'm going to paste in my library URL. So there's my library URL. I'm going to attach a file from somewhere in my messy, we'll take this one, somewhere in my messy temp folder, right? And hit attach. Okay, so here's my upload button. I'm just going to hit upload. It sends data to the server. And once it's uploaded it, it's going to show us a link so that we've got a nice little UI. I'm going to refresh this and see if we're up yet. Nope. Sleepy. Should be up now. There we go. Okay, so here's our new guy. You guys, why we stick a date time in front of it is just to help make sure that you don't accidentally overwrite something that already exists. Okay, so we like unique names, but that's all controllable through command parameters. So you can decide that you want to use like a different name for your file when you upload it, but the default is to prepend that date time. So now we can, if we want to, we can delete it using delete from SharePoint. But you can see how that UI is kind of obviously like a little clunky and chunky, but you can see the general idea of how that UI might work nicely for a user. And now we've deleted that. Let's hit F5 again here and get a nice refresh, and you can see that that file is now gone from the library. So a little bit of formatting makes a big difference for users here in terms of what their experience is with Save to SharePoint, and being able to delete, I think, is a really nice option for them. Another really popular command is insert, and we also see a lot of use of the delete command. Now for my insert here, what I've done is I've got some nested tables going on. Why would you want to use an add new row button instead of the default widget? What I like about having an add new row button instead of using the built-in InfoPath widget is in InfoPath I can disable the addition or removal of a repeating section for a user, or based on some form logic. Maybe when my form is at a certain status you can no longer delete things or add things. But you can't just hide that widget, and I don't like that UI very much. I don't like the fact that the user can click on something that doesn't do anything. All that does is make the user feel frustrated and like their thing is broken. So instead what I've got here are buttons where you can go ahead and add some additional formatting in terms of showing and hiding, and then I've got a little delete button here as well. Now in these cases, especially like here, my delete command, it's, as you can see, a concat because I'm using a bunch of logic, and that is because this is a nested repeating table, right? So I need to know which row contains the child row I wish to delete. Okay, and you'll get a chance to take a look at that formula, and we'll just preview this real quick, and then you can take a quick look at what it does. Add new row adds a new parent row. This adds new child rows, so it's visible what I'm about to delete. You know, well, I could make these all different letters. That would make it simpler, wouldn't it? You know, and then my delete command, you can see, took out that row, takes out that row. You know, I can have a button that deletes all parent rows that are a certain value, right? And that took care of everything that was A. I could insert a child row to the first parent where the field is A, right? You have a lot of flexibility, right? Because you can use any kind of function or formula that you can come up with in order to determine what you're going to pass to the command node. So I just had these as some simple samples to sort of inspire your creativity. Now, one thing you'll have seen online and in documentation is the concept of using insert to copy data into your form. And I've done a webinar on this before, and we've got training where we've done this before. And I just want to give you a little heads up. When you see that technique, what you'll usually see, and I've got a sample of it, I think, too, in here, is we set a repeating node, we insert the repeating node, and then on the repeating node we have some rules that set values. I'm going to double check. Yeah, I do have that here. So when I have this view that says copy data, what I'm doing is first I'm deleting my main data source table, and then I'm inserting a count of these second data source rows. Then on this field, my copy table field, I have rules to set the two values. The only thing I want to give you kind of a caveat on is that this can be expensive. So sometimes this is a little slow, a little sluggish. When you're testing this approach, test with realistic amounts of data. Okay, don't be like, oh, this works great, except in reality, you actually have 200 rows of data you're copying into the main data source and you only tested with 3 rows of data. Don't do that to yourself. If you're dealing with large quantities of data, you should use the transform command. You should use an XSLT because it's going to be much more efficient than this approach. So it's just something I want you to keep in mind. Don't freak out and be like, oh, I have to go learn how to write XSLT. I'm not saying that. This may not apply to you, but just keep in mind that you may have performance issues using this approach and that you want to test with realistic amounts of data. And if it doesn't work in a performant manner, go post on the forum or something. Let us know that you need help with a transform, and we've got a couple of people around here who are really good with XSLT and can probably just help you on the forum. Okay, but it just, now this little sample here, you can see I've got, 10 rows or something like that. So if I click my button right now to copy to main, let me see if I can make this fit a little better so we can see it. So now I've copied my data. So now I've copied my data into the main data source. It deleted all of them and then it copied them in. It just, I'm going to back one of these out so you can see that it does get repopulated. Like I said, it's fine with a small amount of data. Very much more, be careful, use a transform. And next, SetValue. So this is the last one I wanted to show you, was the SetValue command. I have on InfoPathDev a post about modifying manifest files to filter the target of a rule. Because when you go and you set a rule, we can't say we're going to set a field and add an XPath filter here, right? There's no filter button. We don't have any way to add a filter. Now you can save your form as source files and manually add a filter. I've done it before. It's not my favorite approach, but it's doable. With qRules, we've got SetValue, and what that does instead is it just allows you to have a filter there. And so in this case, I'm saying SetValue, and I'm going to set anything where the calories are greater than 200 to a very helpful do not eat, right? That sounds like a horrible diet and I don't want to be on it, but at any rate, it's just kind of for demonstration purposes only. So we can see all of these total calories. Anything greater than 100 or 200 gets set to do not eat. And so now we've got things where things that are greater than 200, I've set this field to this additional field to do not eat. We can type in a limit and say, look, we're going to use 400, and in this case we're using a concat formula. My point here is just simply that SetValue is going to give you a more efficient way of working with repeating data. So just when you're working with repeating data and you need to set only field B where field A equals C, SetValue will do this for you, and it's very useful for these types of scenarios. I think that's pretty much it on this sample form. You're going to get it and you'll be able to dig through it and take a look, and hopefully it will clarify some things that you might not have tried before. Obviously the command overview is a great source of information, and when you get stuck, please be sure to post on the forum. You can email me too. It's hillary.stupa@qdabra.com, but I'm probably going to ask you for the URL to your forum post. And the reason for that is not because I'm mean, it's because that way we've got the knowledge out there where somebody else can find the question. Does anybody have any questions right now about qRules that I could answer for you? The one question I have was, I guess I had a poll that didn't have enough options to it. I should have had never used. Okay, well, if we don't have any questions, that's great too. I hope this gave you some insight into how qRules worked and encouraged you to start using it if you haven't been. post questions on InfoPathDev, there is a qRules specific forum. If you pop them in there, we're even more likely to find them and answer them. Support@qdabra.com is also a great place to get help. Although, again, you know, it's great if you can post questions on the forum, and if you don't get an answer in a timely manner, please let me know. Okay, and that is for sure. Like if you've been waiting 24 hours and nobody's replied to your qRules question, definitely drop me an email for that, okay, because I do want to know. You guys, it was so great having a chance to talk to you about qRules. You guys know I love it. And do fill out the survey. We'll get you these materials. Hopefully this sample form will help you think of some different ways to interact with qRules. And I hope everybody's having a great spring and has a great day. Thanks so much.